All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Chris Marshall. Chris, welcome to the show. So awesome to have you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute honor to be with you. And I believe I'm guest 185.
I'll tell you, you are. That is correct. You are. And I know you and I were just talking right before. And man, hosting this podcast over the last couple of years has been hands down one of the most rewarding things I've done in my 27 years as an entrepreneur. And I love hosting these interviews. I love that I get to facilitate so many amazing conversations that make an impact in this world. And of course, our audience is, entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, and I'm looking forward to this conversation right here today that you and I get to have, Chris. And so what I want to do is I want to start. There's this guy, Andrew Ailman. I have never met him. I have emailed back and forth with him. I have been on his email list for I don't know how long, quite a while. I get 2 emails from him every single week. He runs a platform called Podcast Guests. And through the emails, I have met a number of really awesome podcast guests. Chris, you being one of those. And
well, here I am. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah. And shout out to Andrew for that and for what he's doing in this world, because Andrew, you're making an impact, my friend. And I want to just, shout out to you for that. And so, Chris, what I'd like to start is just to turn it over to you so that you can share a little bit about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you're doing, the impact you're making in this world. And we'll start there so we can just set a little bit of context for this conversation today.
Super. Yeah. So I guess I'm a multi-passionate. I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of things, but I think probably the best way to sum this up is the nickname I earned. And the nickname I earned was the uncertainty scientist. And I bring together a number of fields and really look at both how the world's changing and how that change affects our decision making. And a lot of my research was really digging into performance psychology, behavioral science, neurology, neuroscience, economics. You kind of name it, whatever is interesting or relevant to the changing world around us. And where this kind of took me was, so I published a book last year, so 2022, called Decoding Change. And the research behind that was really trying to deliver a framework for CEOs, entrepreneurs, investment managers to better understand the changing world. Because what I was seeing going on was everybody would say they knew the world was changing, but none of them could tell me how. And so obviously, as a global investment strategist, which is one of the caps I wear, understanding how the world's changing is pretty important. And I do a lot of that work from looking at the big trends and mega trends going on. And what came out over those years of research behind the book was that we stand at this pivotal moment in human history. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is not just technological innovation or disruption. It's not just AI. It's not just the metaverse. It's not just nanotechnology or anything else you want to throw at me. It's changing demographics. It's a changing world order. It's a changing climate. It's a changing cultural philosophy. And we have all of these things going on at once. Now, one of the things which this takes me back kind of to very young age as a young athlete, and we'll get into this in a minute, is what happens to our thinking, our performance, our decision making when things become stressful, when we become anxious, when they become uncertain, when ambiguity rises and complexity is there. And so a lot of my research back in 2016, so this is kind of when I was doing a lot within behavioral science, was actually looking and trying to force people into experiments and test, well, what happened? How did they make decisions around investments in domains of losses and gains? What happened to their decision making and where did that go? And one of the things I really found was that the more uncertain the landscape becomes, there's a lot of people who love and cling to the status quo.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting in a changing world, because the status quo is the very thing which is not going to exist tomorrow, and we cling to it. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's the ground I cover. As the uncertainty scientist, I do a host of things. I obviously blog, I have a newsletter, I run workshops. And so one of the big things is actually training, as I said, CEOs, entrepreneurs, leaders, really, anybody that has to make high stake decisions in an ever increasingly complex, fast paced environment. I help them understand how innovation comes about. And the hint here and the clue is it's not linear, it's not smooth. And then how do we get better at coping in what I'd call really hostile environments? And they're hostile because our bodies respond to them as if we're under life-threatening conditions. It's a response from our evolutionary biology, that we have this wiring in us and this incredible sensory perception. Our brain is always trying to think ahead. It is always trying to anticipate what's not happening now, but in the future. Yeah. And that evolutionary wiring is designed to get us out of trouble when a lion faces us or a bear comes at us, not when somebody sends you a really aggressive email.
Right.
or anything else which triggers us in our modern world. But we have the same physical response, and it dramatically affects how we see the world, our perception, our relationships, everything. And when we bring this back to business, business people, certainly the leaders of organizations, certainly investment managers, one of the fields I work in, we are paid to make good decisions. Yet we don't pay attention to the state that we're using our bodies, our brains, to make those decisions.
Wow.
So there you go.
Wow. You know, this is so, this, what you just, so I am totally fascinated by what you just shared. And, you know, it's very interesting in my world, what I've seen over the last, you know, we'll just call it 3 years, you know, since COVID hit in 2020. You know, I've been this relationship guy for years. I've been facilitating, you know, relationships that impact millions of people. And what I have seen in my world is that it seems relationships are becoming more and more valuable. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this, because it's really interesting now what I'm seeing going on. So just like maybe 3 weeks ago, I sent an email to connect these two guys that I know. And they connected and they had a conversation. Well, one guy emails me. Now, I do know one of these guys was in Chicago last week speaking at a seminar. And it was a 3-day event last week. Well, the other guy emails me last Wednesday morning and says, hey, I just want to let you know I'm flying out to Chicago tomorrow for the last day of this seminar so that I can meet in person with that other guy that you told me about. And thanks so much for opening doors. And another example, a small group of entrepreneurs that I serve a month ago, it was a month ago yesterday, I was hosting a Zoom call for them. And he was telling us about a big problem that had arisen in his business just the day before. So this was a month ago. He was telling us about this, and he told us about what the problem was and what was going on and everything. And he had, you know, we were the first people he had even talked with about this. And so some solutions came up. And one of the other things that came up, and I pointed out to him, I said, you know what? I said, you are already surrounded by the people who can help you with this. And it is just a matter of time of you talking with those people and letting them know what's going on, where you're going to find the exact person that you need to talk with to solve this problem for you. And the thing is entrepreneurs at that level, solving their problems is extremely valuable. Well, just yesterday, I held another Zoom call for that same group of entrepreneurs, because it was 1 month later now. And I noticed, hey, you're not in your normal location. And he's like, no. he's like, I'm actually down in Argentina because, you know, that problem I told you about, I'll give you an update. But he's like, I'm here in Argentina this week, and we're going to solve this thing this week because I did get connected with the right person, and I'm here to take care of this. And I'm like, you know, this is the kind of thing that is going on that, like, I didn't see so much of this. You know, I've been connecting, like I said, entrepreneurs for years, but now there's this, especially among well-established entrepreneurs, that they'll travel around the world
Yeah,
to
yeah.
solve their problems and connect with the people that they believe can help them. And I've noticed a big shift in that. And it's kind of like what you were just talking about and stuff. And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are social creatures. And you know, I love one of the kind of the quotes from Einstein. You always have to be careful with quotes from Einstein because I think about 98% of them are made up, aren't they? But let's just say that he did actually say this. You know, when he was talking about innovation, he said it's like combinational play. And what he was referring to is like two things which have never kind of come together ever before suddenly clash for the first time. And that's one of the things that can happen when you're in the right conversation with somebody else, that you just suddenly see something from a very different angle.
yeah,
That's actually one of the real powers I've found from you know, when I'm in a conversation with a CEO, an entrepreneur, another investment manager. It's sometimes you just say something in a certain way. Yeah, I don't even want to call it a coaching call. I just want to say it's a conversation, and somebody goes, "Ah, oh, yeah, that's it." And you know, as you say, you know, these relationships are so powerful, but they also can work the other way. They can also be destructive, because part of our autonomic nervous system, so that you know, our brain lives in essentially a darkened box. It has no windows. It can't see out. It can't actually directly communicate with the world. It has to rely on senses. And when we start detecting danger and we go into these survival modes, so uncertainty is obviously one of the big triggers I look at for this survival mode.
okay.
Um, what we actually find is we can pick up on each other's sensory state, or kind of mind state, if you like. Is somebody calm, or do they feel like they're in danger? Do they feel like they need to be more rigid, more aggressive? And we co-regulate with them. We actually pick up on their kind of their state, their senses. This is one of the reasons why people find animals so soothing, because they tend to be in a far calmer state.
Yeah,
So relationships can take us to incredible places, but they can also take us to places where we are more stressed, we're more hyper aware, hyper vigilant of what's going around, just because we're feeding off somebody else's state.
sure. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, we've definitely got some, you know, I'm looking forward to getting to know you a whole lot better, Chris, because like I said, I'm really fascinated by what you shared here and stuff. And so, well, but I want to keep this conversation kind of on track. So I'm gonna shift gears here now. Now we've got a little bit of context set here. So I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of
Sure.
the listeners. So have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Chris, I'm just really excited to hear your story, your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, so for me, I have a really strong one. I have to go back to when I was like 13 years old or so.
Okay.
So I think this is kind of 1996, 1997. I've just aged myself. Um, but actually, I was lucky enough to come out to Killington in your beautiful country. So up in the Green Mountains, central Vermont, and I think I was probably first or second year on the British Alpine ski team, so the children's team.
Uh-huh.
And Killington has this incredible they call it the mounting school, and it's part schoolwork, it's part skiing. And it was there, I was only there for a matter of weeks, training and everything else. And I came across this performance psychologist called Dr. Jim Taylor. And Yeah, I mean, he basically was running group sessions. And he
Okay.
was introducing concepts to all of the athletes at KMS, Killington Mountain School, about imagery, guided imagery, about breath work, relaxation techniques. But the phrase which stuck with me, the phrase which he came out and said was, there's a physical game and there's a mental game. And as a young athlete, that was the very first time I'd ever considered that there was more to it than just technical skill or physical prowess. Because obviously, when you watch sport or when you participate in sport at an amateur level, you kind of just go, okay, well, yeah, as long as you go to the gym and as long as you eat right and as long as you get skills right, you're going to be a great athlete. Well, nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
You can have all of those things and still never get anywhere because your head isn't in the right place. And for me, this was probably the reason it sunk home so hard. This is where I have to also admit that I'm a naturally anxious person. I'm probably least naturally suited to my profession. It's probably why I had a natural inclination to work out how we don't become stressed in uncertain situations. And that's because I'm autistic. And so I'm naturally hypersensitive to overstimulus, overload, kind of all of these things which plague neurodiverse people. And this was where, as a young athlete, I was an extremely anxious athlete. So to give you a very, very kind of quick stop of ski racing, as a kid, you tend to either train or race through what's called slalom and giant slalom, two different disciplines. Slalom is the really kind of tight turns, and the giant slalom gets a little bit longer, bigger turns. But they tend to be run over two different runs. And the times are then added together to get the final time and score. And in the first run, I would be terrible, okay, because I'd have so much pressure, self-pressure. I'd put it all on my shoulders. I would get in the start gate, and I just couldn't perform to the level that I knew I could in training. Come the second run, when I was out the medals, and I didn't really care anymore, I had nothing to lose, I'd actually beat the whole field and then come back up, often to get on the podium. And it was this, but coming back to kind of this meeting with Dr. Jim Taylor, it was that phrase, as I said, there's a physical game and a mental game. And where this has kind of transformed my life is not only helping me see and manage kind of overload and overwhelm for the last 25 years or so, but also now coming from this from a point of view of how do we make the very best decisions in hostile conditions, uncertain, ambiguous, fast-paced, complex environments. There's a technical game in business and there's a mental game. And in business so far, we have not done enough to up the mental game. But if I'm right, that we are living at this time of absolutely paramount, pivotal change, radical social change, then the mental game suddenly becomes the deciding factor.
Wow. Wow. So, this is, I've been studying this stuff myself for a while. And
Amazing.
I've had some mentors in my life that have just, I know for me personally, when I used to own a publishing company and I ran that business for 13 years. And by anybody says that business, anybody on the outside looking in would say that's a successful company. But yet, when I started that, it was very exciting. But by the time, those final years, year 12, year 13, I was just losing interest because I was like, I knew there was something more for me, and I had a taste of it, but I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know where to go with it. I didn't know what to do. I did not have clarity around it at all. And I will tell you, that is an extremely frustrating position to be in,
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask you a question. Kind of when you're in that state, how good is your decision making?
Your
how,
decision making totally sucks.
yeah, you can't be creative, you
Yeah,
can't see, you can't even decide which option is a good option or bad option. You're in this kind of, you're scatterbrained.
yeah,
And one of the things which I find, super interesting. So if I'm doing like a kind of a speaking at a conference or a seminar, I'm often quite mean to the audience. So like, kind of be warned if you ever find me speaking to you. I ask them questions, and I know that I ask them questions which are really hard to answer, but some gentler questions which I do sometimes ask. And one of them is, I just say, put your hand up when I say the place where you get your best thinking.
okay.
And I start with locations which I know nobody's going to put their hand up. I'm giving away all my stagecraft secrets here, but it's between friends. So, and I typically say, okay, put your hand up when I say the location where you get your best thinking. I start with the office because it's just an hilarious moment when nobody puts their hand up. Actually, sometimes I get one or two people, but I tend to find out that they were sat next to their boss and they felt like they had to put their hand up. But it's this moment where the audience suddenly goes, they kind of look around and go, oh, nobody else has good decision making in the office. Then you start going, okay, put yoga, running, the shower, on the beach, on holiday, and everybody starts going by the. But you've named like two or three places, and 98% of the audience are now like, yes, yeah, that's me in the shower, running, yoga, whatever. And it's nothing to do with the physical location. It's all to do with where you are in your mind, in your brain, where you are in terms of your nervous system. Is it in a safe place where it can engage in abstract thinking, or is it in this survival mode, this stress state, overwhelmed state, where it is rigid and it can't think more than, it's not open-minded, it's closed-minded. And so bringing this back again, back to you, I know before we start recording, you just said you've just been away. You've just had a few days away with the family. Now I know you have a big tribe, so this might not actually work. But if you got some time to yourself, then I bet you had moments where you were like, oh my word, that suddenly clicked into a place.
Yeah.
And it's in those moments of pauses where we actually get the most clarity.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, this weekend, this last weekend with family, that was more focused on family, and I did not have a lot of downtime to myself. But what, I can distinctly remember other times. I mean, I remember that not that long ago, my wife and I were in Maui, and
Nice.
that we love going to Maui, either just the two of us or with the family. But when it is just the two of us, and I remember just sitting there on the porch of the place that we had rented and just overlooking the water, and like Lisa was in getting ready to go out to dinner, and I'm just sitting there on the porch, and all of a sudden this thing that I'd been like thinking about, I'm like, that's it. And it happened as I was just sitting there on the porch watching the sunset over this absolutely just beautiful view, just completely relaxed. I wasn't looking for a solution in that moment. I was not like, how do I solve this? No, it wasn't like that. It was like I was just sitting there enjoying the moment, taking in and thinking to myself, man, how awesome, how lucky am I? How blessed am I? Getting ready to go out to dinner tonight with my wife in this beautiful, amazing place. And that's when it was like, oh my gosh, that's it. And this solution I was looking for just came to me. And like that kind of thing, I do experience pretty doggone
Yep.
right. Yeah, no.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the challenge, I mean, this is kind of where my work then went, was, okay, it's great to be able to say, okay, when I'm on vacation, when I'm away, I can do this. But obviously, for most people, we just can't go, okay, well, I've got this really big project or this big deadline. I know I'm going to fly to the other side of the world and just chill out for a week. It's just not possible. Our lives are too busy. And therefore, how do you bring those moments of breakthrough, those insight moments, those aha moments into the daily the daily kind of experience, the human experience of work. And so where I kind of arrived, and again, I have to go back to Dr. Jim Taylor and that phrase, there's a physical or technical game and there's a mental game. And this is just what I'm playing with now, is just the mental game. I'm trying to bring the lessons which I learned all those years ago as a young athlete, trying to cope with, again, a complex, ambiguous, fast-paced environment, and now bring it to both the business and investment world or any high-stakes place. And where I've kind of got to is I've developed a framework. It's a really simple framework, and I'm going to give it you in 30 seconds. It's just called the pause, pause, move framework.
Okay.
And in really high stress, complex environments, there are two bits where we have to pause. And there's specific things which I teach people to do in these pauses. The first pause is actually about assessing your internal state. Where am I? Am I stressed or am I calm? Am I in that Maui setting, or am I in an open plan office with everybody bombarding me and just too much going on? Because what we know from all the research is that when we're in that stress state, we don't just make different decisions, we actually take in different information. You and me, we can't take in all the information. Our brains could not cope. It'd be complete data overload within a few seconds. So what we do is we simplify. We look at the environment and we decide which bits we're going to pay attention to.
Okay.
When we're in a stress state, we take in different information than when we're calm. We're actually bringing in a different information feed. So the first pause in the framework is to actually get yourself back. So it's about micro pauses rather than these big vacations or big breaks. The second pause, which is so important in a fast-paced world, is asking the question of what biases am I using to make this decision? Or what is influencing me? Is it a personal belief? Is it a narrative? Is it just I've always believed this and I want to prove myself right or somebody else wrong? Because there's two things which really skew our decision making. One is oversimplification or using the wrong data. Okay. The other is overconfidence. And unless you correct those two things, you will have seen this time and time again through your career, probably through conversations, probably through the businesses you've had. You can lead yourself and your decision making down a very, very dangerous path and believe all the way that you're making the right decision.
Yeah. Wow, that's really powerful stuff right there. That is really powerful stuff. So for anybody listening to this, it's kind of like sitting where I am right now going, dang, this is really good. For anybody who's like sitting there thinking, man, Kev, I really appreciate Chris. I appreciate what he's sharing. How can they get more info on the work that you do and the impact you're making in this world? Do you have any resources that you could that you have to offer?
Yeah, I think probably the best one. So I'm going to direct people to a couple of different places. Okay. The first is kind of just my website. So just theuncertaintyscientist.com. If you can put this in the show notes, then people can just click on it. And there's a couple of resources on there that I kind of steer people towards. One is I have a really simple quiz, which is just called the Personal Tolerance of Uncertainty Quiz. It's 10 questions, and it's going to assess how well can you cope with uncertainty. It's just going to give you a baseline.
Okay.
But whatever that comes out with, even if it comes out at 100%, you can go better. And if in your business, decision-making is key, i.e. the decisions you make have a real impact on both the business and the employees and yourself, then your goal is always going to be to increase your tolerance of uncertainty. So that's the first thing. It's a free quiz. There's no cost to it. Just do it, put in your email address, and you click 10 multiple choice questions and it'll throw an answer. The other is then just sign up for the newsletter. And once a month, I just basically put down anything that I've come across which I think will help others. So it could be something that's feeding into my own research, or it could be something I've come across and gone, oh, wow, that story is really helpful for others. So those are probably the two resources. If they're signed up for the newsletter, then they're suddenly going to just get anything anyway. When I launch a new workshop or something like that, they'll know about it. But that's where to go, theuncertaintyscientist.com, and that's where all my stuff is.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, you know, the goal I've always had for this podcast is that, you know, we inspire other entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And we've definitely delivered on that today, thanks to you, Chris.
Good.
I want to,
Well, thank you, Kevin.
yeah. I just want to acknowledge, you know, the role that you played in that. I really appreciate what you shared. I want to go check out your quiz now as well. And so any last thing you feel led to share right now before we call it a wrap here?
I'm just going to say, you know, sometimes the inspiration, I think, as you kind of said, with connections and relationships, and certainly in this experience, actually, I'm going to have to come honest about Dr. Jim Taylor. I only spoke to him for the very first time, bearing in mind when I was 13 or 14, this was all group work. He was this doctor of psychology at the front of the class, and I was just this 13-year-old athlete lying on the floor. I never spoke to him when I was back then. He doesn't remember me, yet he had such a profound effect. Actually, very recently, I made contact with him, and he was just so delighted that he'd had that impact on somebody else. That there had been this 25-year gap, and so I think my parting words are just: you don't know how you help others.
That's right.
But certainly in a world where we do face a lot of hurdles up ahead, then anything that we can do to help others, it can be a minute thing. This guy who I'm talking about didn't even know at the time he was having such a profound impact.
Yeah.
He didn't know who I was, but it's lived with me throughout all of my life ever since, and will continue to.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that, Chris, because that's come up a lot in the course of doing all of these interviews for this podcast, that quite a large number of the people that I have interviewed have, and I remember the first guy that I ever had that experience with, it was Justin Brook. It was early on in doing these. And he spoke about this friend of his, Travis Sago. And as it turns out, I'm also friends with Travis. So I knew Travis personally, which I thought was even more cool. But when he got all done, he's like, man, he's like, Kevin, he's like, I have never spoke about Travis. Like, he doesn't even know all this stuff that I just shared with you, you know? And And he's like, I want to share the recording of this interview with him because I want him to know what I really think about him. And I was like, Justin, I said, you know what? I said, I'm really close friends with Travis too. I said, I'll tell you what, I said, I'll get you the recording of the interview. I said, you send it to him sometime tomorrow. I'm going to also send him a message sometime tomorrow. And we'll double up and we'll make tomorrow Travis Sago Appreciation Day in our world.
Amazing.
So we did that. And the next morning, I got an email back that Travis had sent to both Justin and I. It was a Loom video that he had made, and he was completely beside himself. He was almost in tears. He's like, you guys, he's like, I have never experienced anything like that before. And he's like, I just want to thank both of you for just making such an impact on my life today. And and I can tell you, this has happened lots now.
Amazing.
And it's been, and for on my end, it's so cool to help facilitate that kind of stuff, because people, like you mentioned, like with Jim, all these years later, until you reached out to him and reconnected with him to let him know that, man, when I was just 16, you had such a profound impact on my life. He never knew. He never knew. And yet now you got to share that with him. And I can only imagine how that made him feel. And, you know, what I've really come to find out is that no matter how successful somebody is, no matter how great we think things look from the outside looking in, there's not a person on the face of this earth who gets too much appreciation. We all want more appreciation. And you know, and who knows, maybe you might decide that you want to share the recording of this interview with Jim and stuff, and share that. You know, that's totally on you. That's totally on you. But I just, you know, I think it's huge to just let people know what we think about them and what the impact that they have had on our lives. And kudos to you for just doing that, because you know that's powerful. That's powerful. And so thank you again, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for such an awesome conversation.
Yeah, yeah. All right.